All right, let's talk about the M250. Probably my favorite LMG, especially when you play the support class as kind of like a medium to long range, instead of like the DRS version where you're like diving in more like an assault style for it. It's got a pretty good rate of fire, like definitely very solid, kind of in the middle of the LMG class. A great muzzle velocity, especially when you put on the extended barrel. Now you're talking like almost sniper shots in terms of speed of that bullet. What really sets it apart is the damage model. It's like 25 damage regardless of distance, whether you're up close or far away. And so you definitely have some viable options to use it up close because the speed at which it will fire, its rate of fire, and the extreme damage that you're going to get. So you definitely can win some gunfights up close. So let's dive into the firing range a little bit and get into how this gun operates. I want to show you kind of some raw footage, and then we're going to jump into like the full level of attachments, and we'll go through some attachments and why I use them in the particular way that I use them. When this gun shoots, it's got quite a bit of vertical recoil. The other thing I notice is when I'm moving the gun left and right, the bullets are kind of like jabberwocky, like the recoil starts bouncing me left and right a bit. So if you're shooting at faraway targets, better to like level your sight first and then start shooting, right? And if you just kind of go full auto, you'll notice it is quite jumpy. Right? Now, being that it is so jumpy, you still land a decent number of bullets when you get to hitting a target. And up close, even if it's jumpy, it doesn't really matter, right? You only need 4 bullets to kill, right? So even these mid-level range, there are no attachments on the gun. All you have to do is just kind of gently pull down on the mouse and keyboard, or controller if you're using that particular one. When it comes to extreme distance for it, like notice that those first shots kind of like sort of shoot you all over the place. The gun is quite jumpy. So when we want to use it for extreme long range, remember that because we're going to use some attachments to help us deal with that. Now, that being said, in terms of a pure fire pattern, hopefully you've been listening to the sound of the gun. And what you're listening for is a quick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the trigger and I'm going to hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm listening for that 5th bullet, and then I'm going to let go for a split second, and then I'm going to hit the mouse button again. So it's like hold down for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let go. Hold down, let go. Hold down, let go. So you're going to listen for that 5th bullet pattern, right? Over and over again. Like that's the kind of fire pattern that you're listening for. I'm trying not to drop the targets because it's like interrupting the way you're listening for, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, when you see I'm going to shoot in between the targets, you'll see like that's roughly the pattern that we're going for. And then obviously you want to like be pulling your mouse down as you're shooting at it. Now, that being said, we need to talk. I want to spoil a little bit at the end of the video and talk the full-on builds, and then we'll get into a little bit about why the builds they are the way they are. I want to go into one particular build where I do a lot of full recoil control and show you a little bit of how this works. When I put in a pretty extreme scope and a lot of recoil control, notice like how quickly and how easy. Like this thing becomes, I don't even want to say a laser, but it definitely has got some laser-like qualities. It still has a fair bit of jump to it, but it's a lot easier to control compared to when we started off with no attachments whatsoever. So that's where we're going to think about having some attachments that give us a little bit of support with that part. And now let's dive into a little bit of how the attachments are going to specifically affect this weapon. All right, so let's talk about how the grips affect the recoil pattern. So on the left, like usual, we've got the base recoil pattern of just full auto, holding down the trigger. Then we have the slight, the moderate, et cetera, all the way on up. So when you think about how the recoil pattern is playing out, generally, if you use just kind of the ribbed vertical, which is the 20-point grip, let me show you which one I'm talking about. So this is the ribbed vertical, the 20-point grip. That gives you a really good step down from its base recoil pattern. And although we can spend a little bit more points on the next 2 grips up, they don't provide a massive benefit in terms of how much it tightens up the recoil pattern. I do want to note that as you're going deeper into the clip, you'll notice that you do get a lot more tightening of those final sets of shots, but that initial recoil pattern, it definitely helps with those first few bullets. That's going to come into play when you think about using this gun at long range. The further you're engaging your targets and the more consistently you're going to engage at long range, the higher up you may want to go with this particular grip, because you just need to land those 4 bullets. So if these first few shots can hit your target with that extreme damage, you're going to knock them down really quick. But for normal use cases, I definitely would say that middle of the road grip, that rib vertical seems to be a pretty solid choice in terms of the amount of points you're spending and the benefits you're getting from recoil from like close distance up to mid range and then like some general long range work. All right, so real quick about the barrels, there's nothing to say. There's a heavy extended barrel, use it. You only have two choices of barrels. There's not really a reason to stay with the standard barrels. Let's talk a little bit about the muzzles. In terms of how muzzles affect the recoil pattern in full auto, so again, there's the base recoil pattern, there's the first, the 20-point muzzle, the first break that you can get that actually does something. Then we've got the linear comp, which you can see it definitely tightens the pattern in terms of its left to right. And so there is a use case. If you can get comfortable with like the pure up and down, then it functions kind of like the RPK's recoil pattern if you're used to that. And then we start getting into the suppressors, and obviously the base suppressor doesn't really do much. But then as we go to the long, and then obviously the lighten suppressor, as you hold down the trigger, it definitely keeps the firing pattern somewhat tightened up. So if you're going to be engaging purely at long distance, then you might want to consider maybe either using the long suppressor or the lighten suppressor, especially if you're going to be holding down the fire button and kind of just emptying the clip like you saw earlier in the video. Now, in terms of the muzzles, if you can get used to that, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 firing pattern, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., and kind of letting go, it's like pumping this particular gun. That's what the fire pattern looks like with all the different barrels. The only thing I would say, it really varies in terms of how much you have to pull downward on the mouse. So, for example, the linear comp, because it tightens up the left-right spread, the vertical spread is a lot stronger, so I felt like I had to pull a lot further down. But then in terms of the suppressors, I noticed like the long and the lighten suppressor, like usual, it's a little more forgiving if you're not as accurate with that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to help you control some of that recoil. So again, if you're using this gun for long distance, I would say it's probably worth it to spring for the long or the lighten suppressor, but you can't go wrong with any of the suppressors really, or even just having no muzzle whatsoever. As long as you know how to control that particular recoil pattern, you're just going to be pulling down a little bit harder on the mouse with some of these lower quality barrels. All right, so let's get into builds for the M250. There are a little bit fewer options when it comes to the M250, especially using it as designed. One option is if you need kind of like an all-rounder, but you're mostly going to be using long distance. Again, you might want to trade out your 3x scope to be something a little more reasonable, like a 2x, 1.75, just depends on how good your eyes are. If you're going to be doing some close range and some long range fighting, you could equip the blue laser to help you a little bit with that left-right movement. Let's equip the ribbed vertical grip. Heavy extended barrel, and then obviously, jump up and get the lighten suppressor. In terms of bullet types, I've tried the hollow points, but the hollow points don't really make a difference in terms of reducing the number of bullets required to kill. It is funny to see like a higher damage jump up. And then likewise, there is a 100 rounds belt, and if you could afford it with like basically no other attachments, you're welcome to do it. But I'm not sure why somebody would want to do it, because it definitely affects how fast you can draw and move and all that sort of fun stuff. So I don't ever go for it. But you are going to reload this gun a lot more often because it chews through bullets so quickly. So that's kind of like an all-round build. What I use, especially when I'm trying to run like RedSec, for example, is a different build that really is focused on engaging at a long distance. So I'm going to use a longer range scope, like a 3x. I could even bump it up. I need the lighten suppressor, so I have a little more forgiveness for when I'm not going through that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fire pattern as tightly as I should. Heavy extended barrel, and then obviously I went for the classic grip because I wanted as much recoil control as possible. What makes this weapon a little bit more challenging than the KTS in RedSec is the fact that it does have a decent amount of bloom, especially compared to the KTS. So the farther away you are engaging the target, the more your bullets are going to spread out left and right. The RPK is a little bit tighter, but it loses a lot of its momentum, and so the damage isn't as strong when you're hitting a target. Whereas if you're hitting the target, you are knocking them for 25. And generally when an opponent sees their health dropping so fast, that's when they kind of freak out and panic and stop shooting at you. So if you're going to do extreme long range like RedSec, or I should say Battle Royale specifically, you might want to spring for the bigger grip, the lightened suppressor and a larger scope, and then really get used to that recoil pattern, and just know that you're going to have some bloom involved that is not involved when you're thinking about like utilizing something like the KTS. So I think those are really the two viable builds I've had. So like one for when I do some general gameplay inside of like escalation or something like that, where I put the blue laser and throttle down on the grip because I don't need it quite as much since I'm getting up close, and then I'll roll down to a slightly shorter scope. You definitely can play around with it because the light and suppressor, if you're being good with your firing pattern, you could drop down to a lower suppressor and increase your grip if you're having trouble with that. And then likewise, if you wanted to roll down to just the standard suppressor, you could change out your grip, because if you are going close range with folks, you might want to consider something like an angled grip to bring down your aim down sight speed, because this thing on its own has a pretty slow aim down sight speed. So as a tip for you, if you're thinking about engaging at close range, you need to aim down sights quickly, you might want to roll and get something like the slim angled or the full angled, etc., to really help you bring down your aim down sight speed just a little bit to win some of those close range engagements to it. So hope that helps you think about utilizing the M250, and I'll be now moving on from the LMG category.